introductions this evening here at 6:06. My name is Nick Neptune, Chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. We'll proceed with our Vice Chair.
Joe Caruso, Vice Chair and Chair of the Policy Committee.
Brian Thomas, Outreach and Engagement Committee.
Alex Rottenberry, Policy Committee.
Pierre Tong, Planning Committee.
Elizabeth Alley, Policy Committee.
Mary Jo Gallenbeck, Planning.
Tammy Stern, Planning Committee.
Celeste Bravo Taylor, Planning Committee.
Thank you, everyone. We will now proceed with the approval of our minutes from our previous meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Rottenberry. And I see a second from Commissioner Thomas. All in favor?
Aye.
Any objections? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Moving forward, we have our period of public comment, which I do see some members of our public in the audience who perhaps might have a comment. I would advise, for those of you who do have a comment, if you'll keep them to 2 or 3 minutes, please. But otherwise, you're more than welcome to join us, I think, at the podium here. If you'll state your name and your address, and then share with us your public comment.
Yeah, Margot Aerosmith. I have a comment and a question. First, I want to thank everybody. I've met with Nick and the young lady. I was at I think it was the Planning Committee, and that was very interesting. At the Planning Committee, I learned that they were choosing between, it was either 3 or 4 different plans to restore our on-street parking where I live. And I believe one was chosen, or you came close to choosing one. And I really want to thank everybody for allowing me to attend that. My question is, and then I'm going to follow it up with a statement, is when is it going to happen? Because I'm real anxious. Now, I do want to say, as driving here today, driving down Kaplan about 20 yards before the intersection, all of a sudden the bike lane disappears because instead of having 1 lane for driving, there's 2 lanes because they have to have a right turn lane. So if they can have that, obviously they're not concerned about connectivity and they're not concerned about safety. So I think it would be a nice idea if we just took off all of the no parking signs, and then but again, some of the plans, if they want to have no parking on the other side, so at least we have some of it back. But I would like to know, since I know there is a plan now, when are we going to see it?
Thank you, Ms. Aerosmith. I would have to defer to staff if you could offer an update on where we are with, I think, these concerns along Kaplan Drive.
Yes, so the Planning Committee back at the April meeting, I believe, did review some different alternatives that could be considered as part of any future changes to Kaplan Drive. There are currently no programmed projects in our priority list for Kaplan, but the next steps in this evaluation would be to further engage the community along Kaplan and the surrounding streets to understand their feedback on what those alternatives would be.
And may I ask what the plans for engaging the community are?
So we are pursuing our bike plan update this upcoming year, 2024. There will be several opportunities for engagement through that process that will result in reprioritization of what's identified in the bike plan.
But again, I just want to emphasize again, Kaplan is not part of connectivity because there isn't any there.
Thank you, Ms. Aerosmith. Ms. Godwin, thank you for the update. I think that we all look forward to creating space and time for our community to participate in that engagement process and to proceed from there. Do we have any additional members of our public with a comment?
Hi, my name's Sean Blanker. We're neighbors, but I'm a big fan of all the trails here. Neuse River Trail and the Walnut Creek, man, they're just fantastic. And I just do it for cross training. And anyway, I had a couple concerns, and one of them is there's like so many break-ins on the trail at the parking lots, especially in Neuse River. So, and in fact, I've stopped going there because so many, like you'll see the glass on the ground out there is like, it went from like 1 to like 6 in a few days. And I was like, I'm go out for a 3.5-hour ride. I don't want to come back and see my car's been smashed into. It's just, I'm like, if you guys could put signs out there, just say like, and you don't have to have surveillance or anything, but just threaten it. And maybe that will scare them away or something. But it's happening in all the lots out there. There's just people going around to the lots and breaking into people's cars. So it doesn't make me feel very safe going out on my ride. So that's one thing. And the other thing is I go across the road on Gorman and on Walnut Creek. And that intersection is just insane with the people. They don't know what to do with that light. You push the light and they will just they see you there and they will stop whether the light is flashing or not. And then I literally, this lady stopped and then all these people just slammed into her and pieces of car were flying at me. I ducked them all. And I'm like, all I did was push this button to cross the street here. What it needs is like an overpass or something there. So it's just not safe for people to stop. They just don't know what to do right there in that spot. It's just kind of a weird area.
You said this is Gorman and...
Gorman, it's the Walnut Creek, Gorman, and it's over there by Avent Ferry and Gorman, right up the street from it. It's so dangerous. Literally, I pushed it and then watched an accident with all these a battery flew by me. I literally dodged it. So the car parts flying. It's just, every time I go and push that one, all the other roads are fine. It's just that one that is like dangerous. So...
Is that a Greenway Trail crossing only?
It's
not an intersection, but a break in the road?
Yeah, it's got it's like at a dip down there, and it's got a light, and you'd think people would know what to do. To wait for the flashing light, and then it stops, and then the bikes, but people just stop as soon as they see a bike there.
Yeah.
And then the ones behind them just slam into them, and it happened to me directly while I was there. It was just these people smashing in it. Everybody's confused what they're supposed to do. I guess nobody knows what the rules are, but it's just that's the only dangerous intersection I've encountered. So,
could you remind us of your name again, sir?
My name's Sean Blankert.
How do you spell your last name?
Blankert.
Blankert.
She wants me to ask you how to get on your committee, so because I'm retired now, I'm like I got lots of time. So.
Really? Well, we're always looking for good people, Mr. Blankert. And I hope you won't be surprised if, we're certainly in touch.
Yeah, go ahead.
But I would also, and this is certainly for the public, I think, good, we have over 30 to 40 boards and commissions across the city. And frankly, any resident who feels so inclined to get involved, to get engaged at this level, you should feel encouraged to go to, I think, RaleighNC.gov. And to find there's like a whole, I think, section just on boards and commissions. And there is an application that we've all filled out to become a part of the sort of larger sort of pool of applicants that then City Council can draw from in making their appointments to the boards and commissions. And if I recall correctly with this application, you can signal which boards, which commissions you have a particular interest in. And so just, I would say you should feel encouraged to pursue that if it's of interest. And of course, if it's helpful to talk about this offline separately, I'm certainly very happy to do so. I think anyone here on the commission will be happy to chat with you about that.
Sounds great. Yeah, no, I'd love it. I don't know if you want a chemist, but I'm an ex-chemist, so now I'm just an athlete. So.
Well, I would just say, if we could pivot for a moment back to your original comment. So I'm hearing really sort of two separate items.
Yeah.
There's this matter of safety and security along our greenways, and it sounds like you've made particular notice of Neuse River, sort of the greenway stretch there, and wherever folks have been parking, you've observed a number of break-ins.
Yeah, I haven't seen the break-in. I just see the results of it. And one of the guys came up and told me, oh, yeah, there's just his car had been broken into, and there was nothing in there. I don't leave anything in my car. I don't think anybody does, but they just go through it anyway, and you're just thinking, I really don't want to come back and see my car's windows smashed in. And it's kind of like making it so I don't want to go there. But I mean, I love the Neuse River. I drive on and do like 50-mile stretches on that and ride that. But I'm like, I just don't feel safe going out for a 2 or 3 hour run and then come back. So I'm trying to find other places I could go. But if there's something that can be done, like just threaten them with surveillance, something to let them think that somebody's watching or something, and maybe that'll stop them. But yeah, no, it's like discouraging me from going to the trails.
Well, I think that, again, the commission appreciates, you flagging this and kind of bringing it to our attention. It's certainly something that I know we've discussed in years past, the safety and security along our greenway system, just in our community. I would certainly welcome perhaps an update, if there is any to share, from maybe not immediately now here with staff, but if there were capacity to engage with our colleagues with RPD. I know that there is a unit sort of specifically set aside and devoted to the safety and security of our greenway trails. And we can follow up perhaps at a later date on this, but I think the commission would appreciate hearing from our colleagues with RPD on that note. And then specifically with regard to this intersection at Gorman, which, I'm hearing from colleagues that it's been a troubled intersection for some time. That to me is a part of a larger conversation that we'll have this evening as it relates to flagging these very specific issues and finding ways to integrate our capacity to address them, both as a commission and as staff, within the context of our ongoing workload. We'll touch on that later this evening, but again, deeply appreciate, Mr. Blankard, you bringing this to the commission's attention.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kellebeck.
Commissioner Neptune, yes, thank you. I'd like to just add to the comments. Commissioner Alley reminded me that this is the ad hoc crossing where we had a fatality on our greenway crash. And I would document this as a near crash because there was a car battery that almost hit your head, which Sean Driscoll, our Vision Zero program manager, was interested in the potential of collecting data from the general public on near misses so that we could have a more accurate understanding of where the conflicts are in order for us to achieve Vision Zero. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will take this back to the Parks Board Greenway Committee on both cases.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I quickly clarify?
Yes, Ms. Allen.
I actually think this is where it was an ad hoc, and now it is a hawk signal at this crossing,
Hawk
right?
signal.
That there was an unsignalized mid-block greenway crossing. There was a fatality and a hawk, so the flashing lights were installed. But it made me curious, he said that a bike pulled up to the crosswalk and cars immediately slammed on the brakes where they're supposed to wait for the flashing light. I mean, like, I wish that people would slam on the brakes when I walked up to a crosswalk. But nonetheless, it made me curious what the rules are at a hawk light if cars are supposed to yield to somebody in that crosswalk in advance, like if they don't push the flashing light or whatever. Like, were the cars correct in stopping before the hawk light was activated? I don't know.
So that's a question.
Yeah,
we're not sure.
I don't know the rules of a hawk light.
Mr. Shoemaker?
Right, and I wanted to pull it up so that I can get this exactly correct. So hawks are relatively recently approved as a traffic control device. So the biker, the pedestrian that approaches the crossing is supposed to push the call button. And from a vehicle's perspective, when all three lights are black or not shining whatsoever, they have the ability to go through. It's not stop controlled. Once the individual pushes the button, it will start blinking yellow. That is letting them know that a change is coming. Drivers can still drive through it at this point. Then it turns to a solid yellow. That's when they're supposed to stop or supposed to start stopping. And then the two at the top pull red and they stay red. Then that is whenever the walk signal for the person crossing the crosswalk proceeds across of that. And then there's a countdown. I think it does change, and the reds start flashing back and forth, and vehicles are allowed to drive through if no bike or pedestrian is in the crossing at that point. And then after it stops blinking, it goes dark again and cars can proceed through.
That's super helpful. Thank you. From the cyclists or pedestrians' perspective, when you approach a hawk, like on the Greenway, is the no crossing light always on, or is it dark?
We can get back, but it should be just like any other signalized crossing, so that it should have a red hand.
Always,
yeah, until
Okay.
until it's you have the right of way.
That's great. That seems like it would be clear for both users. I confess I haven't used one as a pedestrian. Maybe I need to go for a Greenway walk in this nice weather. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you for explaining that. I do have issues with if there are no vehicles, a pedestrian or a cyclist has to stop and wait for the signal to indicate to go. That is, it's just not conducive to the way humans behave, you know. And if it's a bad weather, I mean, all of the above. This isn't the place that we can change those rules. However, pedestrian rules have targeted certain minorities of our community, are subjected to the fines more than the majority, and I think we should be cognizant of that when we put them in. Thank you.
And one thing to add with the hawk signals, they're not like a normal signal where they have to progress through a cycle. Once you call it, it automatically starts. So there should be minimal wait time, just going through the blinking progression.
Thank you. Do we have any further comment from the public? Hearing none, we will proceed with our presentations for the evening. I do want to acknowledge, if I'm not mistaken, we have friends from the Brookside Drive community here with us. And so I would like to elevate this particular item, which is technically in our reports section. I'm going to elevate this, Commissioner Tong, if you would offer a report out from Planning Committee's opportunity to kind of do a deep dive into Brookside.
Yeah, at the last planning committee, we discussed with Barbara and Will about the Brookside Drive project. I don't know, Will, if you want to make any further comments.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So out of that, there were some things that we were looking at that we wanted to firm up that we showed with the committee at that point, as well as after a listening session that you all coordinated with the community. And so what came out of that is that we're going to look at recentering of the double yellow line in the middle of the road. As of right now, it's a little bit offset with 2 lanes going north and 1 lane going south. So putting that double yellow in the middle of the road, this will, instead of time-restricted parking, it will allow parking on both sides of the street at this point. Outside of the right turn lane into Conn Elementary School, where we need to keep that. There were some current concerns from the neighborhood about people turning quickly into Edmond Drive, and then working with the parking division, they identified some sight lines, so we are going to paint curb bulb outs right there to delineate where the no parking exists in X number of feet in each direction that we're still measuring out, as well as tightening that curb radii. Out of the committee, one comment was to paint curb bulb outs at the Brookside and Glasscock intersection at the south side, so that's going to be done as well. The commission asked us to look at removal of the right turn lane, the dedicated right turn lane, and turn it into a single lane approach. Some of the neighbors brought us some concerns of a loss of service, that maybe it would push cars to turn onto Edmond, and they would see an increase of cut-through traffic. So we work with our traffic engineers to run a level of service analysis, and it was next to no level of service degradation. So we're not expecting any of those impacts. So we are removing that, so it's just a single lane approach, and then shortening that crossing to simplify the number of cars approaching the intersection, as well as shorten the crossings. And so this has been a parking division-led plan. So they're planning to go to the community with this general plan to receive additional feedback, present what we report it out here to get their feedback, make sure that we're not missing anything, make sure there aren't things that we need to know about, get their general buy-in, and then ultimately it will need to go to City Council to get codified with the parking regulation changes. And then once all that's done, they'll look to move to implement.
Thank you, Commissioner Tong, Planning Committee members, for your review of this item. Mr. Shoemaker, thank you for the report out. I see some questions and comment. Ms. Sally?
Yeah, I'm all in favor of doing what we can in the short term to slow the cars down on Brookside and on Edmond, but I am a little bit concerned. I believe Brookside is designated for striped bike lanes, and with all of the change coming at the intersection of Wake Forest and Brookside and Automotive with the roundabout there, and with more and more kind of destinations there, that there could be more desire for protected bike lanes, even as far as going across Atlantic to the Ironworks development. So I'm in favor of switching to parking because it seems like that is something that we have funding for, but am concerned about potential future difficulties of then removing that parking for a bike lane. Or is there room for both?
So there is, but it would be
discussed?
putting it in the door zone.
Okay. But did we explore putting in the bike lane as the traffic calming measure instead of the parking?
So Brookside is not on our 10-year priority list. We do not have any bike funding to do this project. This was brought from the parking division, and this is their program that their initiative that they're pushing forward.
Thank you. That is a little bit frustrating. We have lots of money for parking striping, but we don't have any money for the same paint to be used for non-vehicular purposes. One thing I am a little bit concerned about, kind of more broadly, is we have missing middle development going in here. That's not my concern, and the perceived need for additional parking there. I'm also not sure that that's necessarily the case, although, you know, con traffic will use this parking sometimes. But say we are putting needed parking at curbside instead of on private development, and then it gets used and it becomes very popular and needed and expected curbside parking, and then we come along and want to remove it for an adopted city plan. I think we might be setting ourselves up here and elsewhere. This has come up before near the Village District for conflict. So it sounds like if we want change sooner rather than later, we need to put the parking in here. I just want the commission to think about this, that we're setting ourselves up in the future for some needlessly tricky conversations.
Ms. Sally, I want to acknowledge, number one, a gratitude for your comment and your observation. I think that the commission likely shares as a whole, I think, the concerns that you are expressing. You know, this is a particular item that's come up that we, as a commission, have been working with staff to try to identify some potential approaches at addressing the concerns of our residents in this Brookside area. But as it happens, as I understand it, the parking division has had to take a bit of a lead in, you know, identifying solutions here, some potential solutions. It's not necessarily a bicycle pedestrian project, which, you know, so back to acknowledge what you're expressing here, there is a desire for the commission to engage with staff in identifying a policy approach that can integrate concerns like this that come up from time to time from our neighborhoods and our communities. How can we find solutions that are bike and pedestrian focused rather than parking focused? Again, this will be discussed a bit more fully later this evening, but I think what you're identifying, what you're observing is a shared concern, and the commission will be working with staff to identify a policy that will eventually go before council for ultimate adoption, so that we have another tool in the toolkit, so to speak, so that we're not relying on parking as an approach to address residential concern.
My concern is that we have the money and the staffing perhaps to be nimble in the response to the community's concerned about a safe street and speeding with striping parking, but we don't seem to have that. They didn't come and ask for parking. They came and asked for a safe street, and parking seems to be the only solution that we can offer quickly. And I hope that we can get to the point where we can be equally agile with removing bike lanes, adding bike lanes, and to me, it's hard to understand why those are, when the problem is safe streets or the objective is a safe street, why we don't have more tools in that toolkit. So, I think it's more than policy. I think this is a kind of an organizational and funding and staffing issue, right? That this was not a parking problem, it's a safe street problem, and parking can make streets slower, but it doesn't result in mode shift, which is what really makes streets safer.
Agreed.
So,
Agreed.
thanks.
Thank you.
I'd like to just add that those points were brought up in the planning committee as well, so this is the second time that we've addressed it.
Mr. Caruso?
Yeah, I just had a question, and I understand this is being led by the parking department, so you may not know, but the parking that's going to be added, is it going to be restricted, or is it going to be general use parking?
General use.
Okay. Has there been any conversations about what do we call it, residential parking permits, or no? Or
None
maybe
that
in the
I'm
future?
aware of, no.
Okay. It looks like, sorry, I don't know your name. If you wanted to come up for public comment.
Please state your name and address.
Jason Kojak. I live on Edmond Street. Mr. Shoemaker had mentioned that they had looked, when removing that right turn lane off of Brookside on a Glasscock, that there was a study or looked at that it wouldn't push any more traffic down Edmond. As somebody that lives there, I can tell you right now, when the stop sign gets busy and there is a turn lane, they cut down. So can you tell me what is done to evaluate that so I'm better educated?
We pulled traffic counts for all directions, looked at the peak hours, and then they ran a model to determine what the delay is. And there was very little change in the level of service degradation by removing that right turn lane.
And do you know when that study was done, since Conn Elementary just opened back up last week?
We used counts, and we made sure that Conn was in there. We had a multiplier to make sure that it was factored in.
And then how is it determined, though, outside of just the model, that at certain seconds people don't look for a cut through when they're kind of cutting through right now with what seems like two cars? Mm-hmm. Like if you're coming down Brookside and if there's like one or two cars, people are shooting down Grace or those gravel roads that come onto Edmond. They're going down there right now if there's only one or two cars there. So I guess I'm just trying to grasp like where the line is, where it's like, okay, if there's a 3-second delay,
I don't know the answer to that, but ultimately these are all public streets and people can choose to drive on them. So I would have to defer to the engineers that ran the study based on the models.
Because at this point, we're not talking about adding something. Now we're taking something away. That part works. You know what I mean? That right lane works. And so my concern is now we're taking that away when it won't really do anything.
So with that, it will make the intersection less safe, because outside of what you had brought to us, a lot of people had told us that the intersection was confusing, and that when you have multi-lane approaches, it adds complexity where people don't know exactly when to go. And we're also trying to work to shorten that pedestrian crossings. So there's a lot of safety, intersection safety value, but definitely understand and hear what you're saying. And the good thing with this plan, is it's able to change. It's not concrete. If there is a noticeable impact, we can work to see if there are any changes or tweaks that we can make.
And Mr. Shoemaker, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I heard earlier that there will be additional public engagement through parking division.
And
with
absolutely.
The neighborhood.
So the parking division had always planned to interface directly with the Brookside area and the neighborhood before we move this forward, through, I think, a number of communications at the Planning Commission, it came to the BPAC where we had this, where we had to jump the gun on a little bit of the engagement that was planned. But before anything happens, that will absolutely take place.
Okay. Yeah, and I appreciate you mentioning the painting on Edmund to that sight line. So I do appreciate, I'm not trying to stand up here and complain or anything like that. I do appreciate what you all have done to help us with that and put that into motion. And I do second the bike lane over parking just from a pedestrian thing, but I know that may not be in play. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shoemaker. Ms. Gellenbeck?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Godwin, regarding the bike infrastructure, on that intersection on Glasscock, where Brookside hits Glasscock, and then it goes, the other side, is that Brookside as well, and it goes past Oakwood? Okay.
It turns the boundary once it goes up.
Right. There is a wonderful bike lane, one of the first ones I can remember going in on that side of Brookside. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that this section of Brookside that's in front of Conn Elementary should feature a continuation of that infrastructure. And I think that will alleviate the need for motor vehicle traffic for those new residents that are going to be moving into that missing middle complex that's going in. So I just want to make that comment that it feels like we do have a broken infrastructure bike network in that section.
Well, and just briefly, I'm hopeful that in addition to some additional study and review with staff on ways to, again, integrate these specific concerns into their overall kind of workload and work plan, I'm hopeful that with the upcoming engagement on the next bike plan, perhaps these observations, these concerns can be integrated into our upcoming bike plan with the months ahead of engagement. But I mean, these are all, and I want to be very clear, I was going to mention this during my chair's report. I took a ride down Brookside with a member of Planning Commission and a former member of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, Commissioner Otwell, as some of you might recall.
Elementary alumnus.
And we certainly observed how we would have appreciated that connectivity there, going down Brookside, and in fact making our way through the neighborhoods to Gateway Plaza, another destination that's only going to, I think, see continued growth in terms of foot traffic, bicycle traffic. In fact, en route to Gateway Plaza, saw a number of cyclists and families trying to cycle, and make their way. So,
For what it's worth, the bike lockers, of which there are many, the bike racks at Conn Elementary School are completely full to overflowing every day, not just on bike to school day. So these
20,
are kids
25
that are
bikes.
Yeah, these are kids that are biking to school without any infrastructure, like under 10-year-olds. So bike lane would be great.
wow. Ms. Gellenbeck?
Yeah, I'd also like to add that one of the other comments made during the planning committee was to reduce the speed limit on that road. It's currently 35 miles per hour, which...
They dropped it to 30.
Did they? I'm in favor of dropping it to 25. And I think all streets that surround elementary and school properties, Wake County Public School properties, should be that permanently, and not just during segments of the road. And if that was the case, then you will induce ridership and walkability because of the comfort and safety level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gellenbeck. Is there any further comment from our members of Planning Committee or the Commission as a whole on this item? Hearing none, again, I want to express my appreciation for Planning Committee's work and review of this item with Brookside, my appreciation for staff for your time on this item, and especially my appreciation for our community, our neighbors coming through and raising this item with the Commission. We will now proceed with our originally scheduled program with a micro-mobility program update from Ms. Barbara Godwin.
Good evening, everyone. Happy Monday. Here to provide some updates on our micromobility program. So quick agenda for you. I'm going to be giving some high-level information on both our dockless scooter program as well as our bike share program, and just hash out a few updates on both of these program areas. So to start with our scooter program, just a little bit of background for you. So we currently operate with 2 vendors, Lime and Spin. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the lime green and red orange scooters out there. Each company can deploy up to 375 vehicles per vendor. So at any given moment, we can have up to 750 vehicles out in the city. Their operating hours are currently 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. They've been in place like this since 2021 and regulated as such. So almost 2.5 years of this program structure being in place. And then additionally, we currently have 13 dedicated scooter parking zones in our downtown area, concentrated around Glenwood South. So I wanted to provide a snapshot of some of the data around this program. I know there's been a lot of interest in the commission on what ridership looks like. So to date, since the original launch, we've seen about 600,000 trips taken through this program, averaging 0.6 miles per trip and 6 minutes per trip. Some popular destinations that we've seen a lot of ridership in, mostly concentrated in our downtown core along Hillsborough Street, Glenwood Avenue, along that Glenwood South area, Fayetteville Street, and Wilmington Street. So some updates as it relates specifically to the scooter program. Our current agreements with both Lime and Spin end simultaneously in spring of 2024. So we are gearing up for a new request for proposals to solicit new scooter vendors. So not to lapse in service for this program. So getting ready for that, hoping to release that RFP in winter of 2024 on the earlier side. And we'll be engaging with the commission on that effort as we begin to put some of the specifics into place around that plan. Additionally, we're going to be moving forward with some updates to our downtown scooter parking corrals later this fall. So the image you see here on the right is what they look like in their current state. And then this is what we're going to be doing to better highlight where these are located, draw attention to them for riders from both the sidewalk and the street. So we'll touch on bike share now. Our bike share system originally launched in 2019. It was former Citric Cycle, but of course has rebranded to Cardinal Bike Share over the last year. We currently have 30 stations and 340 bikes, most of which are electric assist. All of our station hardware and equipment is owned by the city of Raleigh, but we contract with a third-party vendor to take care of the actual operations and maintenance of the system. And so that third-party vendor is Core Logistics, very local to the Raleigh area. So a quick snapshot of some of the bike share data. You can see that we've had almost 11,000 rides taken this year. And just to kind of frame that up, we did have a brief pause in our service for about 6 weeks when we were transitioning between operators. So missing about 6 weeks worth of our normal ridership data from that number. However, since the beginning, we've seen about 165,000 rides. And then, of course, you can see how that translates into mileage at the top section of this. So to give you an idea about where our most popular stations are, our Museum of Art station is a strong number 1. Fayetteville Street, strong number 2, and then Tucker and Glenwood and Go Raleigh Station are interchangeable for our number 3 most popular. So now to touch on some updates for our bike share system. So you can't see it right now, but it is going to be expanding pretty intensely over the next couple of years through implementation with the Newbern BRT corridor. We're adding 3 new stations. BRT for that corridor is set to be complete in 2025, so you can expect those stations to be complete with that project. Additionally, our private development community is also adding a robust amount of stations, at least 7 that are committed to right now through those construction projects. Additionally, some really exciting news. We are actively bringing forward a new planner to our team to backfill the micromobility coordinator position that's currently vacant. That person will start in October and will primarily be responsible for managing bike share expansion and sort of the strategy and implementation behind that, as well as the upcoming scooter RFP. That is my update. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Godwin. A great update. Any questions, comment? Mr. Thomas?
A question, and maybe there's an obvious reason for this that I'm missing, but why do we have specific hours set for scooter operation, 6 a.m. to 11 p.m.? Seems like a lot of people might use that as a cost-effective means to transport themselves to and from work and could be outside of those hours. So I'm just curious what the reason is for that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the original intent behind that was partly what other communities were doing as part of their best practices with our last RFP, and also just with scooters still having been relatively new to the community, setting some guidelines about how to operate those in the beginning was very important in order to have a better understanding of how they would be used. We are very aware that people use this for transportation purposes as well as recreation, as similar to our bike share system. So that's something that we're interested in looking at in this upcoming RFP, the potential expansion of those operating hours.
Yeah, I hope we do. I see abandoned scooters near me on Lake Wheeler and I-40, and I wonder, it's like, did it just stop working because you were at 11 p.m. there, or So I hope we can look at that in the next RFP.
If you start your trip before 11, you can conclude your trip after 11. You just can't start a new trip after 11.
Does the equipment stop because of GPS satellite work, or what would prevent somebody from using it?
After 11 p.m., they turn off after 11.
So the company has the ability to discharge
Yes.
the batteries.
That seems to me all the more reason for someone to aspire to own a personal vehicle if they're not in that situation already, because it gives them more freedom and flexibility to travel, when they so choose or when they need to.
Well, I will observe, I've certainly seen let's say, a growth in the number of personal scooters out here, like, locked up at bicycle parking, but good observation, Mr. Thomas. Miss Alley?
Yeah, 2 a.m. seems like a time I'd love to not see people get in their cars.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, maybe not on a scooter either, but, with that, maybe we could include some helmets. I was wondering if the technology has evolved or our contracts have evolved around being able to use the tethering for speed. Are there ways that we can make people go slower on scooters in certain pedestrian-heavy environments?
Yes. So we currently work with our companies to do that in certain areas, depending on, if there's an event going on that's been permitted. We take a look at all of the events that are permitted by the city and sort of evaluate what those restrictions look like from a street closing standpoint, and then overlay that with our scooter operating area and determine based on that where we need to slow speeds or where we need to keep the level of service 100%. And on Glenwood Avenue right now, we do have a slow speed zone for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday evenings.
Great. Yeah, I was noticing it. I was at Foursquare for Jazz in the Park the other night, and there was people hauling. But, there were also people on, like, one-wheelers and whatever. And it was a reminder of how slow pedestrians are walking when they're just out for pleasure. So that's great. I'm glad the technology exists and you're using it.
We live over by the university, and I go out running on the sidewalks out there, and I see those bikes and the scooters and the take them up in the trees. So I'm like, do they send some guy out to locate those and climb the trees and get those?
Yes, so both companies.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, so he was asking about some of the scooters that have been misused and land in areas where they shouldn't be, such as trees. And his question was, do you have people that come out and remove those? And we do. Both companies have full-time employees that work through the day-to-day rebalancing and maintenance similar to our bike share program. They all have GPS tracking.
Ms. Gallenbeck?
Yes, Ms. Godwin. Is there a policy for the scooters to be parked on a sidewalk? There's a repeat offender in my neighborhood, and the scooter is always in the same spot on a sidewalk, and it's always in the middle, which I know doesn't comply with ADA regulations.
We do have that policy in place. However, in certain areas, the enforcement isn't as robust, which is the impetus for our scooter parking pilot that we started on Glenwood Avenue that we hope to expand to other areas of downtown. As it relates to the neighborhoods that are more outside of downtown where ridership isn't as frequent, I don't know that we'll be able to implement those there anytime soon, but that would be the goal.
I haven't ridden a scooter in a while, but don't you have to take a picture of the scooter before ending the ride?
You do. There's a way when you end your trip to snap a photo that goes back to both Lime and Spin, and it's evaluated whether you parked your scooter correctly or not. And if you did not, then you receive a fine. There's also a lot of messaging that comes up before you start your trip as it relates to safe parking practices and why it's important not to park incorrectly. ADA requirements are one of those.
So is that fine working? I mean, are people receiving the fines?
I can't speak to that data point specifically, but I can bring back more information.
Ms. Godwin, I've got a quick question about, so I just forgive me, I've actually never used the scooter or any of these scooters, in part because I'm an active cyclist and pedestrian, and I think the scooters are dangerous. That's me. But I do have a question about how one activates a scooter. And I ask this question because I've seen very young minors on these scooters, and I worry about their safety. And I'm just curious, like, how are they accessing these scooters? Don't they have to have like a, I don't know. It's just an app?
There's an age requirement. You have to be 18 and you have to provide information that verifies that you're 18, aka a credit card on file.
See, thank you.
And unfortunately, there might be people out there who are misusing that. But that would likely be the reason.
Okay. Well, I would say certainly, I would invite more consideration around that, I think, because I see these, I mean, they're kids. I mean, and truly like, 7, 8 years old, they're flying. And look, I mean, I think we were all kids once and we all had a good time and yada, yada, yada. But I mean, really though, I mean, and we know while we work toward Vision Zero, just the nature of our streets. And again, I think the comment here is, it's more of an observation. I've been a witness to these kids who are flying on these scooters, and I'm concerned for them. And so if we could, I would invite added consideration around that. Perhaps that's maybe acknowledged somehow through this RFP process as we look to our future providers or future vendors. Just something to consider if there's some additional way to prevent, I suppose, this misuse, this misapplication. And I also invite further comment from the commission. I mean, again, I'm not getting on these things because you're flying and you're so close to the ground. You hit like a bump in the road, boom, you're gone. You know what I'm saying? And I know people who've broken ankles and broken bones with these scooters, which obviously you can do that just walking down the street. You can do that biking down the street. I get it. But the scooters, or in a car, if there's no further comment from the commission, certainly.
Say one more thing. I think you said that the average trip was 0.4 miles, which
Well, if I could just briefly, so, no, this is an intimate session tonight. I want to acknowledge, so Ms. Aerosmith acknowledged that the distance is so brief, so short, you wonder why people wouldn't just walk, perhaps this like less than a mile distance. I will say, what I appreciate about micromobility is that it is a part of a larger ecosystem of transportation for people. And I appreciate it as an additional option as it relates to how people navigate through our city, through our community, through our rapidly evolving neighborhoods. So if you think of it, yes, you're right, certainly walking is always an option for so many, but it is nice to have these additional options with regard to sort of that last mile or two of transportation for a person as they're making the way either from home to a bus stop, or from home to work, or from home to a park, from work back into, again, the greater community. It's all a part of a larger sort of transportation network that I believe we're trying to facilitate as a growing city. We want more options for people as it relates to how they get around, not fewer. At the same time, I'm certainly still going to be concerned about these kids who are flying on these scooters. But all that to be said, Ms. Godwin, Commission, I would certainly invite further comment. Mr. Rotenberry.
Just a quick question. I've noticed on Hillsborough Street that spin bicycles, dockless bicycles, I've spotted those before. I'm curious to know, is that something that's like specially done through NC State, or if the city's been involved with that at all?
The university has their own micromobility contracts. They are contracting with Spin for dockless bike share and also dockless scooters. So we overlap on the scooter side of things, but we do not currently operate with Spin for dockless bike share. So any bikes that you've seen on Hillsborough Street have encroached from campus.
So they're geofenced strictly for campus only or something like that?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Caruso? Oh.
I can tell you in Southwest particularly, we have several communities where there are a large number of children who own their own e-scooters.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like biking games.
And helmets.
They're very popular with the younger set.
Godspeed. Thank you. Mr. Caruso.
I will say that I myself, as a young kid, did have a scooter, not powered though, I will say, but it did go very fast. So, but on a more serious note, I do have a couple questions. One was, you mentioned that the existing terms of the current contract end spring of '24. I assume that's just kind of the current contract. Just to kind of clarify, there's nothing prohibiting our current vendors from renewing. They would just reapply, basically, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So
And have either of them indicated that they're intending to not renew?
Neither of those companies have indicated that. Their current contracts were a 3-year package. We had the option to renew on a 1-year basis. So the end of that 3-year term is concluding in the spring.
Okay. And on the bike share stations, have the 3 station, well, I guess all 10, but have those specific locations for the New Bern BRT stations, have those specific bike share docking stations been identified yet or announced?
Yes. So we have 3 along the corridor. One of those stations will be located at the BRT stop near Edenton Street and Swain Street. The next will be located in front of the old NC DMV site near Tarboro. And then the third location will be out near Wake Med along Shanta Drive at that intersection.
Okay. And the private development stations, have those been identified? Or I guess not identified, but announced?
Several of those have been adopted as part of zoning conditions. So just thinking about, regional connectivity, there's a few that are located along the Atlantic Avenue corridor, one close to the Beltline along Ratchford Drive, and then one north of that, just outside the Beltline along Wake Forest Road.
Okay.
And then several downtown.
Right. Okay, thank you.
If I might, I'd like to expand on the conversation about the BRT stations. What are and connectivity, where, is there a strategy for locating where the docking stations that will service the BRT will be implemented in that area of Raleigh?
Within the neighborhoods, you mean? Mm-hmm. So we are having those conversations. We've got a couple of locations that would certainly fit that first mile, last mile connection into the BRT, but we don't have any that are formally identified at this point.
And when we proceed with the construction, will we put those service stations, as for lack of a better word, will they go in when the BRT bike share station is going in so that it's available and ready to be used by the BRT users?
I will say ideally, yes, but because we have not identified that far out, I can't say for certain, but that would be our goal, yes.
That is the goal?
Yes.
Okay.
Any further comment, question from the commission? Hearing none, Ms. Godwin, thank you for this presentation. Love the new scooter corrals. Looking forward to seeing those implemented soon. Thank you. Well, we will now proceed back to our reports. We will kick things off with the chair's report, followed by policy committee, and then outreach. Transition to staff from there. Briefly, for the chair's report, I'll acknowledge that on the 5th of September, I had the opportunity, with support from Ms. Godwin and other colleagues on staff, to present our work plan to City Council. I am grateful to report to the Commission that City Council, our members, voted unanimously to endorse our work plan once again for the second year in a row. So well done to the Commission and to staff, of course, in organizing our work plan for this term. I also had the opportunity to present, as it happens, at this Architecture and Design Conference in Asheville. And as you can imagine, was more than happy to extol the virtues of making investments and improvement to our public infrastructure with regard to bike lanes and sidewalks and so forth. And that was well received, thankfully. And last but not least, hosted an Oaks and Spokes board meeting, lots of upcoming activities with all of that I'll share during upcoming events. I do want to just acknowledge a couple items here for a moment. I believe Miss Susan Woodson, a local celebrated artist and also who just so happens to be the wife and partner of North Carolina State University's Chancellor, Randy Woodson. For those who may not know, Miss Woodson was involved in a hit and I'm not quite sure if it was a run necessarily, but it was a significant hit. She was struck by a truck downtown just over a year or two ago, and it was at the intersection of Hargett and Salisbury Street. She was a pedestrian making her way downtown, and she was struck by a truck and dragged. Now, Miss Woodson, this very talented artist, after nearly, I think, 6, 7, 8 months of recovery from a smashed leg, not only has she had the capacity and the strength to come back from that, she has organized with our colleagues in Raleigh Arts and I believe Raleigh Transportation, I think, pilot implementation of this crosswalk art to further draw attention, right, for both, obviously pedestrians, cyclists, but especially our motorists as they're making their way, hopefully further encouraging people to slow down as they're navigating through these intersections. And I just want to commend, again, we often acknowledge, the members of our public who engage in constructive ways, much like members of this commission. But I just think this is an extraordinary dynamic here, and it's just worth acknowledging here at the commission table, the nature of that work. Someone that I think many of us know and appreciate, just seeing her channel that energy in such a positive way after such a horrific incident on our streets. So just, again, want to acknowledge Ms. Woodson's work with city staff in making that happen, and looking forward to seeing this crosswalk art come to life and hopefully start spreading around our city of Raleigh. I'm just curious with city staff if either Ms. Godwin or Mrs. Shoemaker, if you've been involved in any of that directly, or if you have any comment you'd like to make about it.
That effort has been led in our traffic engineering group, so they have been more heavily involved in that than myself. But certainly I'm aware of it and think it's a great opportunity.
And one clarification, so it's not crosswalk art. That is not MUTCD compliant. It's still going to be the high visibility bars. What is happening is we're going to delineate curb bump outs in this location, and in that kind of that blank space, that wasted pavement is where Ms. Woodson is going to deploy the art. And we're really excited, again, tangentially involved. We're testing out a number of different art methods with the hope of testing them out for durability, ease of use, and all that stuff, so that we can expand out of just this one location into other locations, and hopefully outside of downtown and across the city. So again, this is really, really excited about this first effort, and we're going to see where it goes.
Well, first of all, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Shoemaker, number one. Number two, if you could extend our gratitude to Traffic Engineering for their work and their support on this project. I want to also acknowledge, it appears that the local artist Jermaine J.P. Powell was selected to work with, I suppose, traffic engineering and facilitating this asphalt art of sorts. And notably, in this article from Raleigh Magazine, there's a fact here that I think it's worth sharing. According to a Bloomberg 2022 asphalt art safety study, asphalt art projects throughout the United States resulted in a 50% drop in traffic crashes involving pedestrians or cyclists, and a 27% increase in drivers yielding to pedestrians with the right-of-way. So, just really appreciate this work happening in our city of Raleigh. One last final note for the chair's report. The commission has observed time and again neighborhoods, communities coming forward with very specific items of concern that, of course, in turn, we would all like to see addressed with, as I often say, creativity and urgency. Now, I think at the same time, the commission understands that our colleagues on city staff have a full workload as it is that is approved by council, if I'm not mistaken, and then you proceed with the implementation of said workload as best you can with your capacity. It is the understanding of the commission that right now there isn't necessarily a policy or process approach for these concerns that come before us from time to time, with regard to these very specific neighborhood issues, right? Like we'll use Brookside as an example, or Miss Arrowsmith with Kaplan Drive. And so with that in mind, it is the desire of the commission to have Commissioner Brian Thomas as our chair for outreach and community engagement, working alongside Commissioners Bravo Taylor and Commissioner Gellenbeck, to work with staff in identifying potential policy and process approaches to receiving these items that come forward to us from our neighborhoods, from our communities, identifying a way in which to receive it and to integrate these concerns into the ongoing work stream for staff. The intent here is for the commissioners, in working with staff, to identify that policy and process. Eventually, you'll come back before the full commission, share an update, share some findings, your reporting on that. And I think ultimately, the ultimate goal is to see an official recommendation on behalf of this commission submitted to council effectively, so that this can be adopted into the work, sort of the work stream, the implementation approach for city staff. Again, I think there were some really good comments and observations tonight that, for whatever reason, it seems like we're not able to integrate bike and pedestrian approaches at resolving some of these streetscape issues. We seem to be relying on parking for whatever reason, when I think many of us know that we should be proactively building out for the future that we want to see. This sort of mode shift, I believe, is the phrasing here. And so, all that to be said, I want to just express my gratitude and appreciation to Commissioners Thomas, Bravo Taylor, and Gellenbeck for your work and support on that effort. Thus concludes the chair's report. Up next, policy.
So the policy committee has two items in committee right now. One is the, sorry. One is kind of working on updates to the TC 321, the behind the curb bike path and bike lane text change, kind of working on kind of what the next steps or kind of the improvements to that process to help that move smoother and faster. And then the other one is dealing with right-of-way obstructions and lane closures and things of that nature. So at the last meeting, Mr. Shoemaker said that he's going to bring back a number of, or have kind of a number of updates on the different things that we talked about. So I assume that that's going to be the coming.
Right. We had planned to work with Ken Dunn, who oversees that, to come present to you guys at a future meeting.
Yeah. So we had those two items, and then also we talked about during policy committee last month. We talked about the issue that Commissioner Gellenbeck brought up about kind of parking, bike parking, and longer term bike parking and things like that. And again, I think a kind of a full report will be made, but kind of the high level is that we have those. There are to some degree there's policy already in place to provide kind of the shorter and longer term bike parking as part of developments and things like that. But I think to kind of our understanding was kind of getting at like in more residential kind of where it's more than just short term, like a bike rack or whatever. It's kind of built into the building and things like that, where we don't kind of currently have probably what some of us would like to see, but I think there's going to be a report on that as well.
I guess the clarity on what exactly we're trying to bring back, because we've been talking with our partners in the planning, and we have a number of UDO code references, as Commissioner Caruso mentioned, where all new developments have, depending on the tier, short, medium, and long-term bike parking. That requirement is already part of the UDO. And I guess where we were hoping to get more direction is the desire to change that policy so there is always covered parking in every location, or I guess is a bike rack good for reason X? And like, where is that line so we can bring in the right people so that we can have that discussion and understand that?
Yeah, I can give a comment on that. And it would be always required at residential developments because that's one of the destinations that people use their bike for transportation. And so I am really thinking about e-bike mobility, which again, sales for e-bikes outperformed sales on EVs. The city of Raleigh is about to implement an incentive for purchasing e-bikes. And these bikes are just too wielding to be able to carry them upstairs and put inside your apartment. So that's why we need to have a secure indoor parking.
Okay, that's great. We can absolutely bring the existing code references for likely multifamily dwellings that exist today and see how you guys want to move on from that.
It seems like one of the challenges will be the UDO will apply to new development, and certainly that is a distinct minority of what is on the ground and what people live in. So I wonder if there are other cities or kind of best practices amongst kind of multifamily landlords for kind of retrofitting properties that would be outside of a UDO. That's not something that we could enforce, but it'd be interesting to know as this new technology has come online and tenants have this desire for it, is it becoming a thing? Like I'm noticing in new development, there are certainly the requirements for covered parking, but you see some development teams going well beyond and kind of amenitizing bike facilities and, along the lines of having like dog wash stations and stuff like that. Right. Be interesting to see if that's happening in older projects as they are bought and retrofitted as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is definitely a challenge in kind of existing multifamily homes where there's not there's no requirement for them to do it, and I think that's I mean, at the end of the day, I think at least my thought is that that's probably something that's going to be best left to our friends at Oaks and Spokes, and maybe trying to kind of push from an advocacy standpoint and kind of like you mentioned, have it showcase it as an amenity for their property, and because it's certainly not especially if you build something substantial, it's not going to be an insignificant amount of money. So trying to figure out the right way to kind of engage with kind of the key properties where it would make sense, especially kind of close into downtown or along the greenways or anywhere that you would kind of reasonably expect to see higher bike ownership and bike usage, if those kind of facilities were available, and kind of ideally try to advertise and kind of advocate that way, because I mean, unfortunately, for better or for worse, there's no real there's no way for us to kind of make them do it after the fact. So it's all going to have to be that they initiate it themselves. So I mean, the way I kind of think about it is kind of going from kind of an advocacy standpoint, and ideally people will kind of start to ask for that as an amenity, as part, they got pools and they got gyms, why not have the bike room type of thing? So but I mean, I think it would be good to kind of bring back kind of the specifics about new development and what that currently looks like, and maybe there's some tweaks we can do there. But as far as existing, I think that's going to be something for our advocacy partners.
I guess I wonder if when we are looking at updating the policy guidelines, if there's a way to have it also be triggered with like a certain level of renovation when projects do get bought and updated, since that is a very common multifamily practice, that it could be somehow tied into that wording or sort of a part of it, like if there's a way for a policy to handle both new and existing, and it be triggered by like permit code changes, like in an area.
Code, like a building
Right.
code thing, like from a planning perspective, if it's not a change of use and they're not substantially increasing their square footage, they might be undertaking a multi-million-dollar renovation, but would never have to come through the site plan process. But maybe there is something that is being triggered for.
Right,
where
like
you
if they're
catch
doing
it,
a level to alteration, that's 50% or more of their
Right.
property, and it does have to get reviewed by the city for a permit.
Right, a building permits, right?
Right, building
Yeah,
permits.
so maybe you could get it through the zoning trade would have to review it, so maybe, maybe there's a way. This could get into our tier 1 site plan issue too.
Yeah, I mean,
It's just a question.
yeah, no, I think that's a good point, that like, we do have, there are a number of instances where there's not kind of wholesale redevelopments where, you know, it's kind of a whole new community, it's renovations or whatever. And yeah, I mean, I think,
Yeah, like again, specifically in multifamily, because
Right,
there's
right,
high
right.
turnover.
Sure.
If they're doing a significant renovation, is there a way that we can,
right.
yeah, that it can trigger that new requirement?
So I can't speak to that right now, but what I can promise is when we bring back, we'll tie each tier and what's required with each level and intensity of development, so that you can review and make your recommendations. And for a point of, I guess, clarity, just so that we're all perfectly clear here, this would require a UDO text change. So that's a completely different process. I just want to make sure that everyone doesn't say we vote on it here and then it becomes law. There's a different things
right.
involved with that.
If only. If only.
I'd also like to just state clearly that this is for transportation issues. It's not recreation. It's not a swimming pool. It's not a gym. This is about infrastructure. It's about the city moving towards their sustainability goals as well as the Vision Zero. So I just wanted to clarify that I am thinking of this as transportation. And I'd also like to add that in addition to the where the people live, that the city also adopt a policy where they retrofit our public parking facilities to accommodate this particular mode of transportation. And again, it is about the vulnerability of this particular product. They cost thousands of dollars, so they're easy to acquire, more so than a vehicle. So we do need some kind of structure that secures them, and that will build the confidence for people to choose that mode of transportation. Because I know firsthand that people who own e-bikes, they use them for recreation because they're nervous about leaving them anywhere but in the privacy of their home.
Thank you, Ms. Gallenbeck. Any further comment from the commission on the update from Policy Committee? Hearing none, we shall proceed with outreach.
Thank you. I do have one item to report. NC State University has formed a bicycle working group. It's been organized and is being run by their transportation office, and I am pleased to be working on that working group, along with Jane Harrison, BPAC liaison and council member. She is also a member of the working group. Among other things, we're going to be looking at pursuing gold status for bicycle-friendly universities with the League of American Cyclists, and just generally looking at bicycle connectivity, safety, storage options in and around campus. And we will be meeting monthly, so I'm excited to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Great update. Great update to Mr. Caruso as well with policy, but really appreciate hearing that
I do
update.
need to take my leave early. I do apologize. So.
All good. Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Thomas advised us that he'd have to step out a little early, but as it happens, my fellow commissioners, we are very close to wrapping up before 7:30. Hello, hello, hello. Up next, staff reports.
One report from me tonight. I just wanted to highlight an upcoming event from our transportation department. We're having a service and safety event on October 27th from 3 to 7. It's a Friday afternoon, the Friday before Halloween. Very kid-friendly event at Chavis Park. You may even see staff dressed up in a costume or two. So we'll have all of our service units of transportation represented, and it's really just an opportunity for the public to come out and engage with our department. So would certainly encourage any or all commissioners to attend, and I'll send out more information via email about that event.
Great update. Thank you, Ms. Godwin. Mrs. Shoemaker? good to hear from staff. We will now proceed with board comments and announcements. First up with general board comments, just actually a quick question for our colleagues on staff. This is a conversation that was brought up previously with regard to urban forestry and addressing some of the trees that run along our bike lanes and, you know, our capacity to kind of navigate through those lower branches. I wonder, has there been an opportunity to connect with urban forestry on that?
So because that will take a cross-departmental effort, there's a lot of conversations that still need to happen before we can come back with a recommendation. As it relates to some of the questions in general from board comments at the last month meeting, we will be providing an update sort of in the form of a written memo with all, because there were so many, and we need a little more time to develop good responses for you all. That will be coming as soon as we can get some type of unified response from all of these cross-departmental efforts.
Thank you, Ms. Godwin.
Just so happens I'm on Urban Trees Committee.
Oh.
We will bring this up in 5,000.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you. It's a team effort. One additional note, I wanted to invite Mr. Rotenberry to share with the commission and with our colleagues in the audience a brief update on his attendance of the North Carolina Bike Walk Summit.
All right, well, I got a little bit of lead time in order to prepare some of my thoughts, and my notes are not here. So to distill down to just a handful of just takeaways, at least meaningful ones for me, we had a really interesting keynote discussion in the morning. A speaker from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, who works in their, I don't think I'm going to get this right, but it's essentially, you know, in their like library studies. He gave a very interesting speech about broadening coalitions and the inclusion of libraries in stakeholder and other kinds of committee meetings moving forward, which is, you know, certainly with my own work, we just as Raleigh is getting a bike ped plan, we also do average about 10 to 12 of those per year, and I manage the ones that are in the area that I work in, and so I can tell you for a fact that that is not one that I have seen yet as a stakeholder. They all have stakeholder committees, and we have yet to include a library. So that was a revelation for myself. I admit that I had some skepticism going into his speech, but was left to convert. So that was really powerful, and I think that that's an underutilized but powerful community stakeholder worth you know, reaching out to. We also had a really interesting update from the UNC Highway Safety Research Center, or the HSRC. They came in the afternoon and discussed a variety of federal, new federal funding measures that have been provided through the new infrastructure law. So that was, I think, useful for a lot of folks in the community, or rather those that are attending. A lot of them were not necessarily staff members from cities, although there were some, but a lot of you know, advocacy groups and things like that, a lot from around the state, you know, Asheville and Greensboro and Charlotte and many others that were all there. And I think that was giving them some ideas about how they might assist communities in applying for these federal funds. And while acknowledging that, you know, for many communities in the state and in the country, that the 20% federal match is usually a major hindrance for a lot of communities in order to apply for that. So that was interesting, although I knew most of them going in, but it was still, I think, a really useful and fascinating one. And then we had some folks that are part of the Year of the Trail. I don't know if we've discussed it since I've started, but that's been going on this year. and that's a broad coalition of folks. But one of the folks that runs it is based out of the Triad area, and she came and spoke about some of their successes this year in getting folks out, trying to have events in all 100 counties. And of course, there's been lots of interesting work being done here, but they particularly wanted to highlight something that's coming up, the Great Trails State Day, which they announced as October the 21st, which is a Saturday. So that's upcoming. So I'm sure that the Parks and Recreation departments of both the county and the city are already scheming up some really interesting things to do on that day to kind of, really highlight the many excellent trails that can be found here, but certainly that may be of interest to committee members as well, commission members, sorry. And so that, again, that's October the 21st, so be interested to see what gets cooked up there. But it was it was a day-long event that was held in Salisbury, North Carolina. And so they had an optional event the next day to go to the Transportation Museum, which is in nearby Spencer. And that was my first time going, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in old cars. They had brought out their old bikes in particular for summit goers, but they also had tons of passenger train and other kinds of trains, so that was a revelation. So, thank you.
Well, that is a great update and report out on the North Carolina Bike Summit. Mr. Rotenberry, I am glad to know that as a member of this commission, you were able to attend. Are there any questions from our commission? Any thoughts? I do want to note, I think you had mentioned that the Great Trails Day would be on October 21st, is that right?
That's what I was able to dig up quickly before the meeting, so please verify that before committing all time and efforts towards it.
Well, thank you for noting that upcoming event with us. I'll make a further comment on that during our upcoming event section. With that, I do want to create space if there's additional board comment or thought to share. Ms. Gellenbeck.
Yes, thank you. I want to make a comment that generates from listening in to a presentation at the 5 Point CAC meeting. It was regarding the new sidewalk that they're going to put in on Oxford Road that'll run along Fallon Park. And it will be above the curb product. So everyone's kind of excited. But I pitched the prospect of maybe using something more affordable that could be more malleable and going faster than having to do the full construction of it. And so I mentioned these products, for example, from Zikla, and some of us call them armadillos. I learned during my study tour abroad that they're actually called zebras. And the engineer on that sidewalk project said that they are not MUTCD approved, and so therefore Raleigh doesn't implement them. So I reached out to the Zikla staff, and I wanted to get some more information from them, because I learned during the tour that they had done over $1 million worth of service or product installation here in the United States. And so I asked them if they had a list of cities that have their products that are implemented. And so I received that, and there are over 80 cities in the United States that actually have the products in use. 3 of those cities are here in North Carolina: Asheville, Charlotte, and town of Cary. So the Zikla staff offered to meet with you guys online to talk about the use of their products here in the United States, to possibly open up the conversation. I think they'd be really helpful in some of the pilot projects that have been proposed, such as the West Street bike lanes and pedestrian lanes that would connect from P Street to Wade. And so, I wanted to bring that to the conversation.
Absolutely, we're more than open if they have documentation where they have been named as an approved device. We're happy to use them. Again, they have not been named currently, so that's why we cannot deploy them here in Raleigh. Our engineers have told us that they're not willing to do that. But if we can have that conversation and they can provide that documentation, we can absolutely look at adding that tool to our tool belt.
Okay, great. Should I direct them to you, Will? Would that be appropriate, or another person?
You can start with me. I mean, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to have the final say, but definitely I can try to put the right people in the right room.
Okay, thank you. Of course, I had another one, but I forgot it, so beware, it may come back to me.
Well, thank you for the initial comment, Ms. Gallenbeck. Oh, Ms. Caruso.
Yeah, I mean, so as far as Oxford Road, is that, I guess a question for staff, is that project still on track for construction next year? And to provide a little history and context for people that aren't aware, this project has been kind of in the planning process for literally almost a decade at this point. And there's been a number of trials and tribulations with it. And I personally am excited to see it actually get built. But is it still on track for construction next year? And is it still going to kind of do a road diet over there?
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, it's still on track. They just held the advanced design meeting maybe within the last 3 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
But it's still on track. And yes, it's going to be a backup curb device that is saving as many trees. I don't want to commit to how many trees, but as many trees as possible on the back of curb, which is why we didn't go that way. And it is shrinking the road to be a more appropriate road size for the traffic that uses it, and then also providing that above the curb space for pedestrians.
Okay, thank you.
If I can add a comment to that particular design, that is a road that I usually travel when I want to reach the Crabtree Creek Trail. And I am concerned about the bicycle traffic and pedestrians kind of share that same space that runs along the park. And when that above the curb sidewalk goes in, then bicyclists will now be traveling in the motor vehicle lane. And I don't know if the road design is going to do a traffic calming element. I think it's going to protect pedestrians, but that is a road that's critical in people accessing to the Crabtree Creek Trail.
And so that street on the bike plan is neighborhood bikeway, so it is intended to have that shared use. So right now it is 36 feet wide. This will be narrowing it to a more appropriate, which should have a traffic calming effect. So right now we are very aware of that component, but we need to see how drivers react to this narrowing, and then if we need to take further action, that would be our next step to implement some level of traffic calming if warrants are met.
So you're right. So the sidewalk, to make sure I understand what you said, the sidewalk is not multi-user friendly.
No, it's a 5-foot sidewalk just for pedestrians.
For pedestrian only use. Yeah, that was my impression.
Thank you. We will proceed with our upcoming events if there's no further general board comments. I do want to again acknowledge, I think as it's been observed, that on October 27th from 3 to 7 we have this service and safety event with our friends at, I think, Chavis Park as well was mentioned. In addition to the Great Trails Day on October 21st, which I believe there's also scheduled to be a pop-up traffic garden on October 21st. That's been brought to my attention as a part of a larger series of events with Oaks and Spokes and a number of partner organizations. We have a bit of a fall bike fest of sorts happening between I believe, holy moly, man, it's like starting any day now, September 22nd. You've got World Car Free Day all the way through with all these events, including, this, there's a community advocacy meeting on the October 18th. There's, all this activity. You got Cranksgiving on November 19th. I'm not going to name them all because guess what? I believe all of these events can be found at the Oaks and Spokes website, oaksandspokes.com, if I'm not mistaken. So I would certainly encourage folks to look up all these events with the Fall Bike Fest in addition to the other events mentioned this evening. Are there any other upcoming events from the commission or from staff? Ms. Sally?
October 4th, Wednesday, is Walk to School Day. So be aware in your comings and goings. And if you want to see a lot of really happy little people joyfully moving their bodies, you're welcome to join us at Temple Baptist Church, which is on Wake Forest Road. I wouldn't recommend you ride or bike there, but once you get there, we're going to have a safe route to Conn Elementary School. Where walking and biking is part of our everyday, but especially on that day. We'll probably follow up later in the month in our own little celebration of Walktober for some walking and fellowship down at the Optimist Coffee Shop. So that'll be later in the month. If you're interested in hanging out with a bunch of moms, come join us.
Love the sound of all of that, and I'm glad to see that the walk and roll to school day on October 4th is included in this lineup of fall Bike Fest activities. So hopefully we'll see some.
Mostly walking, but a little bit of rolling. Yeah, we've got all the rolls all the other days. We got those coming up later in the year.
Love it, love it. Well, thank you for sharing, Miss Alley.
If it could expand on that particular event, so that is the National Walk and Roll to School, roll representing people who use mobile devices for mobility, like a wheelchair. But a school can participate on any day in October to register for it. So, Ms. Godwin, I was thinking about how could City of Raleigh assist motor vehicle drivers with the awareness for an increase in student pedestrian traffic during the month of October?
We can work with our communications team to put out increased messaging for that.
Thank you so much. I'm also excited to share that there are 2 new schools that have registered for the event that are in the Wake County Public School system. So the audience is growing.
Love it, love it. Thank you for your work and leadership with all of that, Ms. Gellenbeck. Oh,
Yeah. Could I expand on the traffic garden?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
it's a traffic garden pop-up that Oaks and Stokes, in partnership with the Wake County Department of Health and Human Services, is providing for Poe Center for Health Education. It's a family event. It's from 1 to 4. If you're interested in volunteering to install the traffic garden, please reach out to Oaks and Spokes, get on their mailing list. We will be recruiting volunteers for it.
Love it. Thank you for sharing and again for your leadership with all of that work. And I believe on that note, unless there are any additional upcoming events, we can now confirm our next BPAC meeting. It'll be on October 16th, 2023. And with that confirmation, the commission is adjourned. Thank you and good night.